Welcome to the Become Who You Are podcast, a production of the John Paul II Renewal Center. I'm Jack Riggard, your host. Thanks for joining us today. I'm excited and grateful to be with Daniel Fitzpatrick today. He lives in New Orleans with his wife and 4 children. He's the author of the novels Only the Lover Sings and First Make Mad. His verse translation of the Divine Comedy, illustrated by Timothy Schmalz, was published in 2021 in honor of the 700th anniversary of Dante's death. He's the editor of Joie de Vivre, a journal of art, culture, and letters for South Louisiana, and he teaches English at Jesuit High School of New Orleans. Daniel, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Jack.
Yes, and if you see a video clip, Daniel's in a classroom. He's instructing young people. Not so easy to do today. So he told me a bell might go off sometime between while we're interviewing here. So if you hear a bell go off, we'll sit tight through that. Right, Daniel? So Daniel, what age are the kids that you're teaching?
I teach 8th graders and juniors. So
and
between
juniors?
about 14 and 17.
Okay. So 8th graders and juniors are all in between all that?
Right. 8th graders and juniors.
Oh, very good. Very good. So that's a little wide discrepancy there, huh?
They change a lot in those years.
Yes. You know, we do a lot of work with young people, Daniel, at the John Paul II Renewal Center. And boy, I don't know about down in New Orleans, but I suspect that they're struggling too. You know, a lot of these young people are really struggling, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many challenges facing them. It's crazy. I mean, it's only been about 15 years since I graduated from here. So I get to teach in the place where I was a student.
Oh, beautiful.
But it's crazy how different their experience is even from mine just 15 years ago.
If you had to, I know that we could probably spend a whole podcast on that, and I don't intend to do that. I want to get down to the new book that you wrote, Restoring the Lord's Day. But before we do that, can you sum up that statement? Because you said it changed a lot in 15 years, which is not a lot of time, right? Less than a generation. And we feel that too. What if you could sum that up? What are you feeling? And and as someone that's working like we do with the John Paul II Renewal Center, again with a lot of young people, it's always interesting to me to get a perspective on that.
Mm-hmm. I think the single biggest change has got to be the rise of the smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we didn't have them when I was a student, and they're not allowed in school. We're not a one-to-one school either, which I think is one of the best things about Jesuit High School in New Orleans, is that we don't have laptops or iPads or any of this for all of the students. So they're off of screens all day while they're here.
Okay, so you're not using Chromebooks, any of that kind of stuff. So you're doing it the old-fashioned way, huh?
That's right. I mean, we have computers we can access if we need them. But yeah, we're not one-to-one or anything like that, which I think is the biggest gift we're giving our students right now, is giving them just a break from these screens that are. I mean, so John Paul II talks about so many of the challenges of technology, beginning with his earliest encyclicals, but he talks about that way in which man stands kind of on the precipice where technology is becoming something that controls him and something that has the ability indeed to obliterate him. And I think for the most part, maybe we're not in danger of our smartphones obliterating us. But in a spiritual sense, really they're designed to capture us. They're designed to hold our attention. They're designed, I think, frankly, to be idols, to be something that we devote our gaze and our love and our time to. And I think that's the biggest challenge that my students are facing.
Yeah, when you think about that, so John Paul was pretty prophetic, wasn't he, with those messages? As I read his earlier encyclicals too, all the way from Redemptor Hominis on through, but Veritatis Splendor, probably Evangelium Vitae, he spoke more about that technology, but he saw that coming already, and I mean, it's really something that he could see that. It kind of separates our our hearts, which is going to bring us into the book that you wrote, because if we don't restore the Lord's Day and if we don't get into prayer, is basically what you're talking about. You know, we live on the surface of things. And I see that with kids all the time when we're out speaking to kids. They're living on the surface and they get very anxious and they'll ask me, you know, what's going on with our generation? You know, anxiety, depression. How come so many of our peers are talking about suicide, you know? And the best thing we can do for that class at that time when I get that opening, Daniel, is to take them into prayer. I'm a scuba diver, so I'll talk about some diving stories, and I'll tell them. I said, you know, it's up on the surface, man. That boat we're on is bobbing around. And I said that sometimes we could barely make it to the edge of the boat to jump in. But once we hit that water and we're down 10, 20, 30 feet, ooh, it's a different world, right? It's a different world. I'd like you to make that connection with Joie de Vivre, you know, this journal of art. Tell us a little bit about that. And you're making a connection between that and the liturgical life and restoring the Lord's Day. And I think that's really beautiful. It's really necessary if we don't get back to the transcendentals, right? What's true, good, and beautiful, especially the beauty of love, right? When we start to talk to young people, they 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 are clamoring for that, Daniel, and John Paul knew it, and I think you do too. So give us a little background on how you put that all together, and how did you decide? You know, you wrote a couple of novels, and now restoring the Lord's Day. So
Yeah, so restoring the Lord's Day comes from really just many years of meditation on exactly what you mentioned, this concept of anxiety.
mm,
Uh, as a kid, and I always feel the need to preface this by saying I had a very, very happy childhood. But one thing I noticed from a pretty early age was that on Sundays I tended to feel very anxious.
mm,
And I was, even from that age, I was kind of aware that, you know, there's something wrong here. So Sunday is this day of rest, of restoration, this day of joy in celebration of the Eucharist. So if that's the case, then, you know, why is it that so often I feel anxious on Sunday? And of course, it comes from, you know, worrying about what's coming up on Monday and the rest of the week, and you know, thinking about, oh, I'm going to get that test I took Friday back, and how did I do on that? But it all comes ultimately from, and this is drawing kind of on St. Augustine, a fundamental difficulty in resting in God's presence,
mm,
which is what the Lord's Day is ultimately drawing us to, is this foretaste of heaven, right? This moment in which, in all the busyness of the world and all that kind of surface turbulence that you mentioned, we're able to come before the Lord, stand before Him, rest in His presence, and allow ourselves to kind of be harmonized with eternity, right? In the midst of all the turbulence. So in Hebrews, there's that wonderful image about hope as an anchor above, right? That the Lord's Day is kind of this. It should be this space in which we're able to anchor ourselves in eternity.
mm.
So that's kind of where the book came from. I mean, a lot of my, I think there's a lot of harmony in sort of all of my writing. So there's, you know, the novels, there's the poetry. So much of it comes from just an attempt to think carefully on the events of my life and to try to raise those things to God, to try to present my life to God in some kind of ordered way. You mentioned Joie de Vivre, the journal, as well. One of the things about South Louisiana is that, I mean, it's a really wonderful place, and it's one that retains a kind of liturgical rhythm to life.
It
I mean,
does.
the easiest example would be Mardi Gras, right? That
Yeah.
you know, we have this very defined sense of, okay, there are different times in the year, and those different times are ordered according to the rhythms of the church. And that's a wonderful thing about this place, and it's very different from what I've experienced in many other places, where every day, every month, every season kind of feels the same. Here we have this wonderful sort of liturgical rhythm that I think helps people to get beneath that surface level anxiety. So in that journal, Joie de Vivre, we're always trying to present people with the goodness, truth, and beauty of the world around us, the world that we're seeing on kind of a daily basis here in our part of the world. And yeah, as you say, that's all connected to the rhythm of life that flows from the liturgy, and ultimately that learning to rest in God's presence, as we're kind of called to on the Lord's Day.
Yeah, and we don't really complete that cycle, the cycle that you're speaking. We don't really complete that weekly cycle, which is an internal cycle within us, until we really make it to the Lord's Day and refresh again. I think we have an opportunity here. I don't know who you had in mind, Daniel, and you'll have to unpack that a little bit when you were writing this, if you had an age in mind. But we have an opportunity here, and you know this, being a teacher, an English teacher, that we have an opportunity here, because the kids are starting to feel this, sometimes, and not all of them for sure, but enough of them are starting to feel it when you speak to young people. You can, when you start to take them out for a walk and just say, hey, let's just go outside. Let's see nature. John Paul, in his theology of the body, one of the things that started to open us up was nature. He trusted in nature. He trusted in creation, I should say, right? Creation, of course, nature coming out of creation. He trusted in the truth of that. I mean, things are real. Some things are real, right? When you look out in the world there, and they're all sacramental signs. They're all these little clues, of who God is. And of course, the crown of creation being a man and woman, right? But anyways, the point you're making, and I'm trying to make, right, is that these great desires are in us. This is not more information you're talking about. See, if somebody just hears you and doesn't really understand Catholicism or the Mass, they'll say, yeah, that sounds nice, whatever. And no, it's more than it sounds nice. This is in our DNA, isn't it, Daniel? I mean, this is in us. When we hear it, when we encounter it, we know, ooh, something just happened, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So in his letter Dies Domini on the Lord's Day, John Paul II talks about how for so many people, the kind of cycle of life has just become this pattern of working for the weekend, right? Kind of what keeps so many of us going is just, let me get through these days of work so that I can have the weekend as kind of my space to do whatever I want, to kind of form myself according to whatever image I see fit, right? Whereas, as you say, we're made for joyful contemplation of God, right? We're made for worship. So that very pattern of creation, that 7-day cycle, concluding in God's own moment of contemplative rest, is something that, we're invited into, right? That God brings us into the picture so that we too can be part of that contemplative joy that he himself feels in looking upon his creation. And ultimately the joy that is at the heart of the Trinity, right? And Father and Son looking upon each other in love. And it's such a wonder that we're invited into that, right? That again, this Sunday rest is not just sort of an absence of labor, but is instead, right, a moment to enter into that thing that we all desire, which is to love and be loved, and to think that God has created this whole universe for the sake of that, right? For the sake of each of us to love and be loved.
And I just want to make a link when you're saying that, that the great desire, again, back to our DNA, that great desire to love and be loved is so important. And to propel ourselves in a way that somebody has to reveal this to us, but to be united to the source of that love, which is what you just said when you're describing the Trinity. Catechism number 221, that big book about everything Catholic. You think it starts out with the moral teaching or the 10. It doesn't. It starts out with desire, number 27, desire, and then it goes to 221, which is God is an eternal exchange of love, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and we're destined to share in that exchange. Well, this is what you're describing, because eternity doesn't mean tomorrow. Eternity means forever. So walk us into restoring the Lord's Day, because this is exactly what's happening on that altar, isn't it? The Son is bringing our humanity, John Paul would say, in a sense, all of our humanity, and uniting it with the divinity, offering this as an oblation to the Father. Then he turns to us in the Eucharist and he pours this out to us. It's amazing. I get goosebumps when I think about it. So tell us a little bit about how the book runs, and how you separate the chapters and things.
Yeah, so it kind of begins with the problem, I guess you could say, which we've sort of talked about already, but it's pretty evident. In fact, so evident that maybe we don't really notice it anymore, that the Lord's Day has pretty much been abandoned in modern life. So in his, I think it was,
isn't that Daniel, isn't that where 666 basically came from, right? I mean, Satan, 666 means we never get to that perfect day, that seventh day.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was a 2004 essay on church as culture that Robert Louis Wilkins, the Catholic historian, writes about. One of the church's kind of preeminent functions throughout its history has been to be kind of a custodian of time. And in our own time, right, that function has kind of been lost in some way, right? Not that the church doesn't do this anymore, but culture has abandoned this ordering of time towards eternity. And so we see that very evidently just in the culture around us, where Sunday doesn't really look different from any other day now. Right?
No, that's right.
I mean, maybe Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby are not open on those days, but for the most part, the stores are open. Everybody's doing their shopping. It's a day.
The gyms are full in the morning on Sunday. I passed the gym on the way to Mass, and it's full, right?
Yeah, packed to the gills. So Sunday is no longer really a part of our culture as a moment of authentic rest in contemplating God. The book then kind of looks into what I take to be a major cause of that, which is the rise of the sin of acedia, or sloth. So a number of thinkers talk about acedia as the besetting sin of the modern age. Now, when we think about sloth and kind of a common view of it, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, because we think of sloth as just kind of laziness. And our age seems anything but lazy. We seem to be in the age of the go-getter, and the age of the grind, and the hustle, and all these sorts of things. So it doesn't seem like we live in a lazy age. But what the church fathers, and what Aquinas revealed to us about acedia or sloth, is that while it can have an element of kind of physical torpor about it, really, when it resides in the heart, it comprises a sadness over the divine good. Right. So at its heart, acedia is a rejection of God's loving will for us. Right. A sadness about doing the things that God desires to bring us closer to Him. And in fact, what Aquinas says is that acedia is precisely a sin contrary to the commandment to honor the Sabbath. Right. Which, again, I was really struck by that when I first read it, because it seems so counterintuitive. And that's partly because our notions of both sloth and Sabbath rest are so impoverished, right? Because we tend to think, well, sloth is laziness, Sabbath just means rest, not doing anything. So how could those two things be opposed to each other, right? But sadness about the divine good means sadness about being in God's presence, ultimately. And so when we think of it in those terms, right, and we think of Sunday as an invitation into God's presence, and really fundamentally through that moment of Eucharistic reception, right, of being not just kind of allowed into the presence of God in the sort of outward way, but being invited physically and spiritually into the life of God Himself through the Eucharist. Sloth makes us sad about that. Sloth tells us, I don't want any part of that, right? I'd rather just sort of be about my own devices. So the
would you
early
add?
part of,
Go ahead. Go. You finish your thought, and then I'll
yeah,
come
so
back.
the early part of the book is kind of going through that process. Okay, so the Lord's Day has been lost. Why is that? Is it because of acedia, as some people seem to suggest? And then if that's the case, then why is our age so prone to acedia? So there we look into different things like, getting away from nature, technology, the sexual revolution, all these sorts of things that kind of tend to turn us away from the joy of the presence of God. And then the latter half of the book is kind of looking into solutions, right? How do we
Mm.
turn back to restore culture?
Yeah. So give us a little taste of some of those solutions, because I would suspect when I think of sloth, and I heard exactly how you defined it, and I agree with that, and I wonder, you know, part of this is because we don't go beneath the surface again. Getting back to my earlier comment, it may be a link to this, at least, because when I'm speaking to kids, at least initially, right, when we initially meet each other, they really don't want to go into the depths. If I speak to college kids on a college campus, let's say, they don't want to talk about mortality. They don't want to talk about, you mentioned kind of we have to aim toward the kingdom, and I'm putting words in your mouth, but you alluded to that, right? We have to have our eye on where we're going. This is where our hope comes from, right? And we line up our hearts and we go, ooh, yeah, I feel something, and it's always an encounter, right? When you were describing the Eucharist, and this is an encounter. People forget this. Our faith is not about the laws and the Ten Commandments. I mean, those things are all part of this. But Christianity, what makes it different is the encounter, and you described it in the Eucharist. Where Christ is coming into us. But we have to see where we're going. If we lose that, we get into this 666 thing again. And that seventh day opens up everything. It opens up not only the seventh day where I can feel a more of an inclusion with God, but I can offer that to my wife and my kids and my neighbor, and everything changes, doesn't it, Daniel?
Mm, absolutely. Yeah, it transforms everything, and that's that again is kind of the point, right? That Sunday, the Lord's Day, is not meant to be like just this kind of aside from actual life, right? So it's not like, I have
Yes,
my
that's a great
day,
point.
my real work, my real life, and then I kind of turn aside for a moment. I do this thing for God, and then I go back to what's actually
Delinked,
important.
right? It's
Yeah,
delinked, and people
yeah,
don't. Yeah, bring that point out a little bit more, because that is so important. What you just said.
yeah. So again, in Dies Domini, John Paul II's letter on Sunday, he brings up this line from Origen, who says that the true Christian is the one who lives always in the Lord's Day.
Mm,
Right. So
mm.
we're meant to live always in the light of the resurrection. Right. And so rather than it just being, this kind of aside, where I take a day or even just an hour, right, and say, okay, God, here's my attention for a little bit. Let me check off the box, then I'll get back to business. Um, this is Sunday is the moment when we're being transformed into true Christians. Right? Sunday is the moment which is supposed to then overflow into all the rest of life, so that everything I'm doing, right, whether I'm working at my job, whether I'm playing with my children, whether I'm doing my taxes, whatever it is that I'm doing that in the light of the resurrection.
Mm.
What the best piece of advice I've ever gotten from anyone, other than stuff that's included in scripture, but one of my teachers at the University of Dallas ended our class. This is like the last day of senior year, and his advice was, never do anything again because you have to. Right?
Wait,
Whatever
say
you
that
do,
again. Never do anything. What, Daniel?
yeah, never
Wait,
do anything again
again.
because you have to. Right? Do everything you do because it is the thing that God wills for you in the
Mm.
moment. Right? So never let your motivation to stay up with a sick child be, well, I have to do this. Never do your taxes because, oh, I have to do this. Never grade your students' essays because I have to do this. Do it because this, through God's providence, is what He has set before you right now.
Wow.
And that, I think, is part of what it is to live in the
Yeah.
resurrection, right? To recognize that all moments, my relationship to God, and the fact that the concrete circumstances of my life, the work I have to do, the people who are around me, the places where I go, all that is part of his design for me. And all of that is drawing me to understand more and more what it is to live in eternity, which, as you say, eternity is not, it's not something off in the future, right? Eternity is now, right? And the Lord's Day is an invitation to enter into eternity now. Right? This is something I'm always so moved by the lives of the saints. Is like, it's so easy to think of, again, this compartmentalized life where, I do my ordinary day-to-day life all through my life, and then at the end, if I'm lucky and God likes me, then I could get into heaven, right? The saints show us that no, like, I start to live the life of heaven now. Why wait? There's no need to delay, right? God is inviting me into the joy of his existence now.
Yeah,
And of course,
and
that
we
involves.
that's such a great point, right? Because for anybody listening right now, I mean, every single person is an eternal child of God, right? We are, the minute we sprung out from the zygote, we explode out on the stage, and you're describing the stage, and all we're doing is bringing our small story into the larger story and let it unfold there, right? We're eternal beings already. And we're working out, which we forget sometimes, we're working out our eternal destiny now. And it's all comes down to love, Daniel. You already said it. Do I become a person of love? Well, how do I do that? I have to be filled with that source of love. And we know this from experience. Anybody that's tried to be a lover, somebody that's tried to be compassionate and kind and go out into the world and do good things is going to come up against their weaknesses and their inability to do that. And then you go, how do I become kind to my wife, say, if she isn't kind back to me? Well, I can do that for a while because I go to the source, right? I don't deplete myself. How many couples do I speak to, Daniel, that don't get that are trying to, suck the infinite out of the finite, and they run out. You just say, "Oh, I got to go find another wife or another husband because I'm done with this," right? But no, I go to the well, right? That's what you have in this book, Restoring the Lord's Day. We're going to the well. I'm receiving love. I'm hopefully in receiving, I'm giving back to God, right? And we have this relationship. But then I'm going out, and it's really the one great commandment split in two parts: love God and love your neighbor, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned the well, and one of the gospel themes that comes up frequently in Restoring the Lord's Day, and one that's just so powerful, is John 4, the Samaritan woman at the well.
Yes, yes, yes.
I mean,
Speak to that a
that
little bit. That's so good,
yeah,
isn't it?
that
That's
story
an
is such.
encounter. That's that encounter we're talking
Yeah,
about.
that's the encounter, and it's on both sides of the story. It's such an example of us, for us to follow, as far as like exactly what we're talking about. How do we begin to enter into the presence of God? Because it's a really curious moment in respect to Acedia, because Acedia is kind of originally known as the noonday devil, right? So it was
Mm.
talked about among like early desert monks who, around the 6th hour, around noon, would start to feel sort of listless and weary, and they'd start to not really want to do their work anymore, right? They'd start to look for a distraction, right? So
Mm.
maybe I'll go to my neighbor's cell and I'll see what's going on with him for a little bit.
Yeah.
Then I'll think about what's going on in some monastery far away where all the brothers are perfect, and I could really be holy there. Um, so that moment at the well unfolds right at noon. So right at this moment
Mm.
when stadia or sloth tends to strike. And Jesus, of course, is tired, right? He's been walking through the day, and so he comes to this well, and he's waiting for some refreshment, right? So his apostles go off to get some stuff to eat. And while he's there, this woman comes up to him, and she's so burdened. She's this, typically, of course, the women would come out earlier in the day, right? This woman is kind of very much this lost sheep, right? She's fallen. There's that bell. I don't know if anybody can hear that.
I
But,
it's very faint, so no,
okay.
no,
Well,
I don't hear it.
That's good. This woman who's kind of fallen, she's behind the flock, right? And Jesus encounters her at this well, and she brings her weariness to him, and he offers up his own kind of weariness to her as well. But instead of getting distracted, right? Instead of kind of turning away from the fight that it kind of is with this woman to bring her around, he gives himself to her, right? He opens himself up to her in love and invites that response of love from her as well. And of course, by the end of it, what do we have? We have this woman who's been transformed through this moment of encounter. We have this woman who's been refreshed finally after so many years of sin, so many years of being left behind by everyone else in her community, who's now going off to tell people about Jesus, right? Who's going off to tell people about this man who told her everything she's ever done, right? And we can think about all the things that she's done, all those painful experiences, those moments of sin that Jesus finally addresses with her. And suddenly that's no longer a cause for sorrow or shame, but having that interior landscape revealed to her becomes an occasion for joy to go tell other people about it. And
Come
Jesus,
and see, she says, right? Then she says, come
yeah,
and see, come and
yeah,
see. Isn't that what we do? Yeah, I want to make a connection here because when you're talking about the woman at the well, he says, you've had 5 husbands and the 6th one you're with is not even your husband. What I think people miss, Daniel, is that woman has her yearning, burning desire to get back to our earlier, way we opened this up for love. And
yeah,
she's not finding it here, right? And the next one and the next one, and she's either being rejected or she's rejecting. And at the end
yeah,
of the day, but here's what I love about this woman. She will not give up. She's so passionate that she's going to keep going. Now she's running out of time. She's probably getting older. Her body's going to give out. Her looks are going to give out. And here's Jesus. And he says to her, I thirst, right? That's what he says to her first. And so now you say, ooh, here's a God that also thirsts for me.
right,
My thirst and his thirst meet at that well. And that's what you receive in the Eucharist. That's what we're receiving. It's so powerful and so we know this, people, Daniel, that go to these sacraments, right? Like confession and the Eucharist. Nobody that goes on a regular basis, say to confession or the Eucharist, ever ask me why we do this. Why do we do this? They know. They know. Now I know there's people that receive the Eucharist, and don't believe in the real presence and stuff. But I think that's getting back to your thesis here with the sloth. I mean, they're not. They're living on the surface, even at Mass. So give us, as we're starting to unwind on time here, give us some of the solutions that people can follow and expect to find in your book, because I want to open up some of those solutions to them so that they say, yes, I need that restoring. I need the restoring the Lord's Day in my own heart, or I have friends or relatives that need to.
absolutely. So, I mean, as we've touched on many times, the heart of it is the liturgy, right? But part of the difficulty is that because of the kind of culture that we're in, uh, we tend to not be formed that well to experience the liturgy fully and to enter into the fullness of what God is offering us. So I tend to think that basically so much of our anxiety and our inability to rest in God's presence has to do with the way that our age has caused us to encounter space and time. And namely, especially through technology, through things like smartphones, we really are being trained not to be in the present, right? So so St. Augustine talks about how time is there's this distension of the mind, right? So being drawn apart between the past and the future, never able to rest in the present. And the way we've ordered our lives tends to really prey on that. through the
Now,
cycle of,
yeah, unpack that just a little bit, because I think
yeah.
of a kid while you're saying that texting, and it
Hmm.
seems like they're in the present moment, right? Because they're texting in the present, and it seems to me like they're living in the present. But what are they missing there? What are they missing when you talk about space and time?
Yeah. So on the one hand, what they're missing is, I think, again, oftentimes connection with the concrete people and things around them.
Mm.
So we're stretched out over the whole globe now, right? So all I have to do is pick up my smartphone, and suddenly, I'm in Gaza, I'm in Ukraine, I'm in all these places around the world, rather than where God has
That's
desired me to.
a great point. That's a great point. Even if I'm texting a person, I'm almost thinking about what they're saying to me and what I'm saying to them, instead of the actual person who is
Mhm.
Daniel, right? And who is Jack. And you're right. Even if I'm texting a person that lives a block away from me, am I present to that person really? Or am I
Right.
just, trying to look good on the next video, or the next, what thing I'm saying, or the next party I'm going to, right?
Sure. And so I think so much of the real labor is kind of reorienting the way that we relate to space and time. And fundamentally, again, the liturgy is kind of what trains us for this, right? So when I enter into a beautiful church, right, and I'm exposed to beautiful stained glass and painting,
Hmm.
when I hear beautiful music, all these things, right, teach me how to look and how to listen, in order to be truly present, to what matters. I mean, there's so many other things. I mean, we've talked about, so being exposed to nature, right? Going out into the natural world, and hearing and feeling God's rhythms at work in the natural world is so critical. Listening to the good music, to hearing good things that tend to harmonize our souls, and to allow us to be invited into an encounter with the beautiful. Um, Family is so important as well, right? That I think it's primarily in the family that we're earliest taught to encounter those transcendentals, to learn goodness, truth, and beauty. Um, Silence is so important also. That we're in such a noisy age, right? That returning to silence is so critical for overcoming sloth, for overcoming astadia, and learning to be present to God again.
Yeah.
Uh,
I I think about some of the saints and the mystics. John Paul did his doctoral thesis on Saint John of the Cross, and of course his contemporary was Teresa of Avila. And so Saint John would be talking about wisdom, to your point. He said three things. You have to be a person of love in order to tap into wisdom. And he's talking about divine wisdom now, right? That's going to actually, bring in depth of our soul. How should I live? What's the meaning and purpose of my life? He says you have to be a person of love, right? So we already unpacked that. You have to go into silence. He said, to your point, I have to sit in that. If I'm not going to tap into divine wisdom until I sit in that. People think they're just being quiet, which is true. Silence is true, but allowing two people to meet in the depths of the heart, right? You and God. No matter who who knows me, even my wife, Daniel, they really don't know me at the very depths. There's always something that's deeper, right? That even the closest people to you don't really understand, right? But God understands, and so you get into that silence. And the last thing Saint John would say is mortifications.
mhm.
And so I think about like fasting and getting away, like you said, from these phones and different things, detaching from whatever would keep you anxious and nervous and suicidal or whatever,
Yep.
right? So detach, and then, ooh, I can sink down and find wisdom, right? And a way to live. How should I live?
Absolutely.
Any when you talked about the solutions now in the last part of the book there, Do you address things like the technology, modern technology, and how we can get away from that? Now, you mentioned in the school there, and I think we were off here when you mentioned it that you don't have cell phones, you don't use Chromebooks, right? In the school where you're teaching, and that has to be a big plus. I would think that has to be a big plus for young people. Um, but when they get home, they're going to be on those phones and different things. Um, what's your I always think about young people because I think it's such an injustice, Daniel, what we're doing to young people now, right? And so they need
Mhm.
to hear this truth. They need to hear the truth. They can reject it if they want to. People have rejected Jesus Christ. They wouldn't be the first ones. But the injustice, I think, comes when they just have bad choices, and people are afraid to proclaim the truth to them. And I think what you're hitting on is the way to do it. Not with this is the way you got to live. These are the rules you got to follow. No, 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 no. Come into silence with me. Take a walk with me. See beauty, right? Let's walk into a church, you guys, and for adoration and just for 5 minutes. Nobody's going to spend an hour there as a kid if you haven't done it before, right? And you don't want them to even. Just take 5 minutes. Let's look around at all the beauty and let's just sit in peace. They'll find something there, Daniel, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have this Jesuit tradition of sodalities of Our Lady. So I help to lead one of the grade level sodalities here at our school. And for the last couple of years, as part of it, we've done kind of a modified version of Exodus 90 during Lent. This pretty rigorous system of fasting
Mm.
and prayer. And one of the things we always get into is, of course, addressing that time outside school and how they're going to be using their phones. Because it's pretty stringent about how much you can use technology during that Exodus time. And one of the things I always tell the boys is, so as you're reading through this list of things that you're supposed to put aside during Lent, whatever it is, if there's anything you read on that list where you say, I couldn't do that, that's too hard. That's exactly the thing that you most need to do, right? And I think for so many of us, right, the thought of putting aside technology, it's one of those things that it sounds like I couldn't do that. How could I manage without it? And those are precisely the places where we've built up idols in our lives. I think the way we spend our time is so telling, right? So you could really tell what someone values by how much time they spend on something. And at a minimum, most people in America spend 3.5 hours on their smartphones a day, which is right about 24 hours in a week.
And how much of that time, do we know how much of that time is waste? In other words, there's probably a few things you really need to do, maybe,
yeah.
right? But how much of that time is wasted, do you think? Do you have any idea? Or is that a can we quantify that?
Yeah, I'm sure it can be quantified pretty easily. I don't know off the top of my head, but my assumption is that a very high percentage of it is waste, right? But and that's, again, that where we waste is where we value, right? So if most of my time is going to social media or TikTok or whatever it might be, that tells me what I value. Just as like, if I'm an athlete, right, and I dedicate lots of time to my sport, right, that that in some sense that's a waste, right? It's not perhaps leading to some sort of productive utilitarian end, right? But it's showing me what I value. If I cook a big meal for my family on a Sunday, in some sense that's there's something over the top about it, right? It goes beyond just what we need to do in order to survive, right? But it shows this is what is important to me, right? Creating this space where my family can rejoice in the good things of the world.
Yeah.
The Lord's Day ought to be that, right? It ought to be this moment of, just like Mary takes that jar of aromatic nard and lavishes it on the body of Jesus.
Yeah.
that's kind of what the Lord's Day ought to be like for us, right? This costly thing that we are pouring out on the Lord, right? Just as a way to lavish our time and our energy and our resources on Him.
And what would you say as we close up here, Daniel? What will that be to me if I'm listening and I think, I should be going back to mass? I really don't go. What are the benefits to me if I step into this story you're telling?
I mean, I think in short, happiness, right? So,
Mm,
um,
mm,
God God created us to enjoy a relationship of love with Him, right? So in Sunday, in the Mass preeminently, right, He's inviting us into that relationship now, inviting us to begin to rejoice in His love. So yeah, I mean, I think in short, right, the stakes couldn't be higher, right?
mm-hmm.
Now, the challenge, of course, is that because we tend not to be very formed for it, and because we're weak, fallen creatures, what's best for us doesn't always feel like there's not that immediate gratification that we can get in so many other things, right? But nonetheless, right, through kind of a long process of growing accustomed to God's goodness and God's love, right? I think people will see, especially if they make a really conscious effort to say, this day is going to be special, right? And make this a day of attention to the Lord, a day of extra prayer, a day when I have fun with my family, a day when I just play with my children, a day when I get outside and walk around and enjoy the beauty of nature, a day when I pray the rosary, a day when I just look to what is good and look to the Lord in those good things. I know for me, it's made a big difference as far as that anxiety that you talk
Yeah,
about. And
yeah.
I think many other people would experience that too.
Well, I'll tell you a very, very short version, and I wasn't going to do this, but you kind of opened this up for me. So I'm the oldest of five boys. The fourth went down. His name is Bob, and we're only 11 months apart. We grew up together. We did so much together. Anyways, last year his wife died of cancer, and so he hadn't been to mass or confession for 40 years. And so he's very anxious after she died. He quit his job to take care of her, bathe her, bring her to the bathroom. I mean, everything, right? And so he was a full-time kind of a caregiver for her, for a long time. And but still not going to mass and stuff. A very, kind of a spiritual guy, they would say, but not the actual solid stuff, right? And so he comes to me one time and he looks so bad after she had passed, and he hadn't slept in over 3 days, not at all. And so I taught him how to pray the rosary. And so he started to pray the rosary, and he would he fell asleep for the first time with it in his hand, and he kept finding himself waking up with his hand on the beads yet. And then he would just pray the next decade, right? And so I recorded in my podcast some, how to pray the rosary, so he was listening to me and then understanding how to pray the rosary. Anyway, so then a couple of weeks later, Daniel, I said, okay, now you got to go to confession. And then you got to go, you really need to experience the mass again. Anyways, I'll cut to the chase here. He would not miss a mass now. After confession, it blew his socks away. So what we're talking about here is tangible, real. He's calm. He thinks about his wife a lot yet, but it's a different process. And so everything you're describing here, Daniel, I can just tell you, and I know you know this too, but anybody listening, this is just real. You got to walk into the story, right? You got to walk into the story. And I think this is a great time because I think our culture has finally gotten to a spot where people are starting to wake up to the evil, the sin and the evil in the world, and thinking something's wrong. So this is a good time, Daniel. So give us any website information. Where do they reach you? How do they buy in the book? Give us the specifics right now, will you?
Sure. So I'd encourage people to go to the Sophia Institute Press website and buy the
Okay.
book directly from them.
Okay.
It is available on Amazon as well, if people prefer that route. Other
Let's
than
push
that,
them to Sophia, though. Let's push them to
let's do
Sophia,
that.
right? Let's support. We got to support each other around here,
Yeah,
you know. And how
absolutely.
about you? Any specific links? You're writing a lot, and so give us some idea where they might check out the journal, if that's possible, or do you have a website?
Sure. Yeah, so I'd urge people to go to jdvjournal.com.
JDV Journal.
That's correct. Yeah, that's the Joie de Vivre
Uh-huh.
website. Yeah, I'd encourage people to go read there. We have lots of online content. Then, of course, primarily the quarterly print journal. I urge people to check it out. Submit if you have a story that you would like to tell. I would love to hear it and see about including it in a future issue or on our website. And otherwise, on Instagram, people can find me at fitz.the.writer. Yeah, but I would love to hear from anybody.
All right, great. Hey, God bless you. Thank you so much. Hang on just for a second. We'll say goodbye to everybody. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And don't forget, restoring the Lord's Day. Talk to everybody soon. Bye bye.